So, all the time, we are directed and put in front of us these celebrities, these famous people. We got people that swing both ways. In fact, one of our
Giggity giggity.
our current president was a reality TV show host, essentially. And all these, fame is a big part of our culture. Always being fame, always being well known is really crucial, because if no one knows you, then you're unimportant. Is the whole concept we have in our society right now, is that fame is good, or at least fame makes you important. So with this in mind, we get into these different concepts of some people saying fame is bad because then all of your stuff's out on display. You have others saying, though, that fame is good, but if you are put into the limelight to become famous, what do you give up? Today we are asking the question, what is the price of fame? This is the Oxymoron Podcast. I am your host, Kios, and I'm here with the majestic Casanova.
Hello, our beautiful followers and not so beautiful followers.
Make that distinction for yourself.
Draw your own conclusions.
So please like, share, subscribe, yada yada yada, shameless plugins. Let's just jump into it. So, what do you initially think is the price of fame?
Well, one of the main things with that, I would say price-wise, would definitely be privacy. With such people as the paparazzi and people that'll follow you basically everywhere you go and try to invade on basically everything you do. Privacy is a very big thing you give up. Another one would be time. To be famous and all, you're normally devoted to doing TV shows and other special events that take up a vast majority of your schedule. And then, like I said, even when you have time, you don't have a lot you can do without the paparazzi invading your privacy.
Yeah, a lot of artists have talked about this, such one as David Bowie with his song Fame.
So in the song Fame by David Bowie, and I want to say the person who does it with him is Paul McCartney for background vocals, but I'm not 100% sure on that. We can figure that out later. But in that song, one of the lyrics is, it lets you live where things are hollow. It kind of shows that, kind of makes you can make you sort of a shallow person in a sense. Another one is, what you get is no tomorrow. It's sort of nothing is really ever the same after you're famous. At least that's my interpretation of both parts of that song.
Yeah, it was like when we talked about a couple weeks back with Hexadecimal. We'll leave a link to our podcasts where we talked about some stuff with him. Or we talked about how these people
cool
being
guy.
famous, the people that are famous have to put on this mask. They have to pretend to be something. Typically they're not. And it can lead to some, issues and stuff. So you have to put on this facade, you have to put on this mask, you have to pretend to be something typically you're not. And it might be close related to what you are, vice versa, but this whole concept of being fame does come with its prices. And sometimes it's literal price. I think to usher in a new artist or a new face into media and stuff can cost upwards of millions of dollars. So I think we have come to the conclusion that there is a price of fame, and it tends to be stuff like privacy and stuff. But with the new generations of media and stuff, you're coming out with different types of famous people. The YouTube celebrity is just as big, if sometimes not even bigger, than the typical star. And in general, YouTubers tend to have a little more creative liberties with their fame. They get to pick a little bit more of the freedom. So they don't have to. Yeah, they're like you said.
They're more self-employed per se.
What do you think it takes to become YouTube famous?
Exactly what we're doing right now. I mean, we're practically there, right?
No. Anyway.
Yeah, I know. It's more of a.
All right, so
I'll just go home then. Fine.
When it comes to YouTube fame, it's kind of interesting that a lot of people go with these certain routes. You've seen them life hacks. So do you think that often having to do stuff make life hack videos is the same as having to be down that route of climbing the ladders of standard or classical media fame.
I'd say there's some similarities, but mostly I'd say it's fairly different. And also when it comes to coverage, like by the paparazzi and other media outlets, also when you're like YouTube celebrity, I think you see less paparazzi coverage. It exists, but it's still, I think, very downscaled. And then I have a question for you. Do you think what you give up to be famous is worth being famous?
I think that's a really, really good question, but because, I think it cliche, even if it is cliche, it comes down to the person. And another thing is the stuff that, you don't necessarily give up. Like some of them wind up giving up, to mention back to the one about artists, is some of them lose their mental health. It declines because of their fame and stuff like that. And we see these cases like this all the time.
Celebrity mental breakdowns.
I mean, heck, and then you get people like Kanye West, which is I don't know, either to laugh at him, yell at him, or cry for him.
All three at the same time. It's a very complicated mix of emotions, honestly.
Because have you seen, or even Charlie Sheen, have you seen some of the stuff Charlie Sheen has said?
Oh yeah. More him than Kanye, but yeah. I know Kanye kind of relishes in fame, though. He does seem to just kind of embrace it.
Yeah, like Charlie Sheen has put he's what do you know some of the quotes he said?
No, all I know is he knowingly slept with people while being HIV positive.
No. Like he has been driven to the point where he has claimed that he is a god, and he drinks tiger blood to sustain himself.
Oh, I have heard that somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, he's out there, dude.
Cocaine's one hell of a drug, I guess.
Another thing is that these people get put into fame. Another really big case about this was Jeff Fogarty.
Fogarty? You talking about CCR?
No. The Subway.
Oh, and that's John. Subway guy?
Yeah, the Subway
Jared?
guy. Jared from Subway. That whole debacle, he was a pretty famous name. And he was a famous guy, but, you can look into the whole debacle, but he was incriminated for I think it was some stuff we won't talk about here because it's a little inappropriate. So if you're old enough to look that up, go ahead and look that up. It's pretty disturbing.
You like to touch the little ones.
But these, people that shouldn't be essentially role models is my point with all of this, is that these people that are broken are put in the limelight and then they get even more broken. And that's another product of becoming famous, is that some people can handle it. Some people can be famous and they can be good. I think a good example of this is Markiplier. He's very famous. He's big and relevant, but I don't think it has he's not hurt by it. He uses his fame in productive ways. He runs tons of charity things for various people, and he does an awesome job.
Yeah, you see some of that also with other channels he works with.
Yeah, other ones too. He's not the only one.
Like Jacksepticeye does some of that stuff too.
Yeah.
He just recently did a charity event, I believe I saw.
Yeah, and a lot of these people that have this fame, they use it to make a difference, because in our society we see that fame equals power. It's not necessarily money. People think it's typically money, but more often than not, it's just fame. Typically with fame, money comes along.
Well, I have a question with that though. Can't money also equal power in some sense?
I think it can, because you can use that to become famous.
It's kind of a cycle.
That's why I think that's in fact some YouTube channels, because we're talking about YouTube, a lot of, Jake Paul and that type of facade, and Rice Gum is another one where all their channel is about is pretty much that they have money.
You're not wrong.
That is, so that's how they became famous, was through their money. I know that
Jake Paul also through Disney.
He was also on Bizarreverse.
I thought so. Okay, I was didn't he acquire money?
He also did
through Disney.
Yeah, but his real claim to fame though was he has money, and that he's Jake Paul, and that's how he became famous because it's it's just everyday bro. You know what's really funny as a side note on that?
It's
Did you
every day, bro.
On that song, I watched someone make a comment about it or whatever. They played a little clip from it, and you know how they have like the British guy that comes on and raps.
Yeah.
You know one of the first lines he says?
No, I try to not think about that song.
England is my city.
Oh, yeah, with the one meme. Yeah. Going back there, I do know the meme. Never mind. Yeah. I know what you're saying.
England is my city.
It's my favorite city, honestly. I love the city of England. I mean...
Oh, no, we're moving there. That's where we're going to live. We're going to live in the city of England.
I want to move to the city of Ireland.
Dude, I want to live in the city of United States of America.
That's not a bad city, yeah. We might go there.
What about the city of Canada?
This video can get 5 likes. We'll go to the city of the United States of America.
We're gonna get 5 likes. If this if this video gets 200 likes, we'll release a face reveal.
Yeah, face reveal.
Face reveal. Yep, that's it.
No, I'm just joking. I will butt chug an entire 4 Loko if this gets 350 likes. Can we do it, guys?
You're gonna have to do that because it's gonna be like 2 years down the line. so YouTube. So there's another type of fame that we haven't really mentioned, which is political fame.
That's a good point.
And the political fame is in these certain circles. People are well known for trying to pervade different ideas. You get different people. We're gonna try to not get super political and say these people think this and these specific people. We'll say the factions, but we will not say the individual people. But certain groups will think that that this should be this way and this should be that way, and then among those, we will say some historical names like Martin Luther King became famous for his ideas in politics.
Junior.
Yeah, of course. I don't think most people got that part. Martin Luther King Jr. But this whole idea that these people become famous for being the leader of different political groups. Presidents, even if they aren't, Obama wasn't famous the same way Kim Kardashian is.
Correct.
So, how do you think that plays into their pros and cons?
Well, normally when it comes to a political thing, you're going to have an okay amount of people that agree with you and like you, but you're also going to have an okay amount of people who disagree with you, normally very strongly when it comes to political things. So that's definitely one of them. There's definitely a fair amount of press coverage also that goes along with being politically famous. And time is also a very rare commodity if you're fairly active politically.
Yeah, in general, we're going to get into more of the gossip side of it. If you're famous, no matter what kind of fame it may be, if it's YouTube, political, news, media, whatever it be, you're going to have gossip around you, and this whole idea that people know your names, and if people know your name, a lot of them are going to try to throw your name down the well. So, but this also happens, even if you're not famous. And then you also can become infamous. So what are your thoughts on famous versus infamous?
The general concept of famous, of course, is you're a popular person in pop culture, and you're fairly known, and your name, somebody says it, the vast majority of people be like, okay, I've heard of that person. Where you're infamous, it's the same thing, but normally for the wrong reason. That would be somebody like
a serial killer.
Charles Manson is somebody most people consider infamous, to where he is famous for the wrong reasons, and also a lot of his popularity comes from some of the things he said. Some of it's taken as knowledge, and other people think he's just crazy, but that's besides the point.
So in a lot of this, there's this idea that any publicity is good publicity, even if it is bad. Do you think this holds up and should be taken? If you're going to be not famous, so let's assume you want to be famous. That's your goal. So with that, should you go for not being famous or taking bad publicity?
I mean, you most definitely could take bad publicity, but then you'd have to be okay with your fame being known as a bad person. It depends how you want to be portrayed being famous. if you're okay with being disliked, hated, and bad things being said, and even possibly threats being sent, then you can. But if that's not what you're looking for, then I highly wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah, I think that this plays into a lot of stuff. Like the Cash Me Outside girl, I think she's infamous for her rudeness.
For
but
sure.
I think that plays in this whole idea that the people that are famous right now they're essentially, it's washed out. I'm trying to think of the term I'm looking for, but they're put in these spotlights because of infamous reasons, in that they take these kind of things and they're kind of put on these essentially pedestals. And I think a big one like that, when we're going back a little farther back, is it's very similar to like rock stars back in the day. Because you hear about these these guitar gods. It's a very
drugs, sex, and rock and roll.
Yeah, terms like that. And it's like these big things that people are well known for doing bad things. It's because a lot of us have these ideas that we want these, these urges. We have, we want to essentially live our fantasies through. That's why I think like a lot of games that are, considered to be bad, but I don't think for other reasons, which we might talk about here in a couple weeks.
That's a good topic idea.
Is that, that people live their life through these people in the way that they do. Because a lot of people, when you watch a movie, typically you try to emotionally connect to the protagonist. And that, you try to connect to these protagonists, these people, emotionally, and try to kind of live out yourself through them, or maybe vice versa, in this kind of a way. And it leads to some interesting outcomes when you pick villains. I think the best villain, at least in TV, I guess it wouldn't be a villain, but rather a what's the opposite of what's not a villain? Not antagonist. An anti-hero is the best anti-hero is Walter White.
Fair.
I think he's, people look up to Walter White because he has a skill. And a lot of people that are famous have skills. His skill is his knowledge. And I think a lot of people, people have different attributes that make them famous. And that people try to kind of live through Walter White and try to find their fantasies. So this is kind of a little bit of a rant, kind of, sort of. But I'm getting to the point that, do you think that people become famous because they see that connection with themselves in them?
I think relatable connections most definitely can be a big part. I don't think it's everything, but I would say it is part of a lot of it. So in general consensus, I would say mostly yes. I think that's one of the big reasons. That, or maybe it's somebody they aspire to be or be on the level of.
Yeah. So my next question, following up with that one, is, do you think that people's concepts around various topics and ideas in like a political realm, they choose these identifiers so that they can become famous and use those ideas to push other motives? So basically, and it doesn't even have to be political, so I'll even take that part out. Just people become famous so that they can try to move their initiative.
For sure. I would say that's something you definitely see in politics, but even some people trying to be famous so they can help promote charities or like wildlife reserves or other things of that sort. It can kind of go either way when it comes to positive or negative, and then there's the whole your interpretation of what is positive and what is negative. But in general, I would say yes, there are some, not all, and I wouldn't even say a vast majority, but I would say definitely in general there are some people out there who use that.
Yeah, I think honestly we're kind of like that. We're trying to use, we're trying to do it fairly though. We're not trying to be jerks about it, but we are trying to use this platform and our fame to try to get movement in places we want to see it, such as in the school system being better, people getting help for those that are mentally unhealthy, unwell.
My colon, somewhere it needs movement. Oh wait, no, I'm back. Never mind.
You see people like you mentioned it before, some of the famous YouTubers like Markiplier and stuff like that do this types of things to try to get this kind of movement. That's kind of like what I think we try to aspire to. Maybe we missed the mark. That's up for you guys to decide. But that's kind of where we're trying to go with it, in that we want to try to use our influence. And that's another thing, is like a lot of YouTubers are called, influencers, which I think is a really weird term.
It is, but I would say in some sense it's fitting.
Yeah, it's so, and we're not necessarily trying to influence anybody in ways that we wouldn't want to be influenced. And honestly, if anyone ever went in the comments below and said, this point, and they factually kept it back, honestly, we probably would dedicate a video to them, and probably if we could, we'd try to get them on the show.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And also, one of our main goals is just to get people to think in general.
Yeah, we want to encourage discussion and creativity.
To provoke thought, basically.
To provoke thought and keep everybody. We want to entertain, but we also want to not just have no substance at all. Which I think, going back to the fame idea, that a lot of people that are really famous don't have a lot of substance. I think that a lot of these famous people, they have a couple claim to fame, but they don't have a lot of substance to them. Some do, and I think that actors are a weird one to talk about because they do and they don't. But do you think that the substance, or you know what I mean by substance, right?
The content, or what's within the content, even more if you want to get a little deeper.
Yeah. So do you think like the substance of a character that's famous what kind of influence do you think that has on their fame in general? How does their substance affect their fame?
Well, it's kind of, this also ends up tying back to the fame versus infamy, where if you're known for something fairly bad and all, you gain fame and publicity for the content that you have, but it's not generally perceived good fame and publicity. Whereas if you're doing charitable things and stuff of that sort, you'll gain positive publicity in general.
Okay, so we've gotten to that time. What are your final thoughts? What do you think is the price of fame? Is the price worth it?
If you're doing something you love and something you truly enjoy, and that brings you fame, yes. For everybody, I wouldn't say it is. But for the people that can handle that, or that it doesn't bother, I would say it's most definitely worth it to them. And that the price of fame would be basically everything you've known being flipped upside down. If it's a fairly large amount of fame, everything you do is just sort of different. It's not the same as it was, and will probably never be the way it was.
Yeah, I think that my final thoughts with this, I want to try to keep it a little bit on the briefer side, but I think the price of fame is you currently. You give up yourself to become famous, which is a kind of a weird thought. So you have to give up who you are to become famous. You have to lay down your rights to become famous. You have to lay down what makes you an individual. You have to give that up and instead take this idea that you are a character. You are, it's like the story. Everyone's the main character in their own story. But when you decide to accept fame, you become the story. You become a character in someone else's story. So we want to know what you think. Please like, share, subscribe. Like, share, subscribe. Make sure
your grandma sees this video. Your mom, everybody you can. Show them this video. Maybe it'll bring them fame. Probably not, but it will help us out.
Fame. Yeah. So we want to know what your thoughts are on the subject. Tell us down below. And for the quick question for today, we want to know: would you be famous? Yes or no? Would you like to be famous? No. Would you? For our quick question today, would you accept fame or not? This has been the Oxymoron Podcast. I'm your host. I was your host, Kios, and I was with the magnificent Casanova. Wow. And thank you for listening.